This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. In October of 2021, the City of Dover was a proud founding member of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, and we thought we would have our look back and see all the progress that's been made. We're having a visit today from homegrown Dr. Jackson Kaspari, who is a member of the coalition staff. Jackson, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Chris?
Good. Your role is Member Services Coordinator?
I'm the Director of Member Services. We do have a pretty small staff team, but I work very closely with our communications manager as well as our community energy advisor.
And I think that regardless of your role, the City of Dover depends on you to help us with some decision-making when it comes to community power, because you are such a strong advocate for the city's inclusion and the community's inclusion, not only in 2021, but up through the rollout of the services a few years later.
Yes, that's very true. In my former role with the City of Dover as the resilience manager, I helped lead the program launch on the staff side, working closely with our Energy Commission and ultimately the City Council, who approved the launch of the program.
So looking back 5 years, what's the feeling at Community Power, the coalition itself? How are you as staff and the board members with what's going through your minds?
Yeah, so just to recap some of the history, this came together with a change in legislation around the 2019 timeframe, and there was a convening group that worked very hard between a few communities up until the incorporation in 2021, as you mentioned. But since then, the organization has grown significantly. We now have 68 members across the state of New Hampshire. That includes cities, towns, and counties, and within those 68 members, 50 operating programs. So it's pretty substantial. The coalition overall serves approximately 175,000 customers at this point in time. And we have about 10 communities in the pipeline that are still looking for an opportunity to launch programs. So in terms of growth, it was fairly rapid. And with rapid growth in a young organization did come some challenges. But I think as of recently, we have reached a state of stability, which has been good for the staff. It's been good for the communities that are actively involved. And we've really improved a lot of our systems. We've offered program and project delivery and offered significant savings in the earlier days. As of recently, there's been a rebalancing between some of those savings and the growth of community joint reserves. And we can discuss a little bit of that trade-off and what that means for the organization.
Yeah, I'd like to dive into that, but I'd also like to at some point talk about the upcoming rate setting that's occurring February 1st and August 1st tend to be the key utility rate setting dates here in the state. Can you talk about the organization itself? I think that people don't understand what kind of organization Community Power is. Is it a power company? Is it a quasi-governmental? It's kind of both in some ways, right?
It is, but it is quasi-governmental, and we're a nonprofit corporation, but we are member-driven and controlled by our members. So the cities, towns, counties that participate have member representatives that are appointed by their governing bodies. Those representatives once a year convene in April, and they elect the board of directors. And so the board of directors ultimately is the oversight body who the executive within the organization on the staff side reports to, similar to a council governance structure. But then obviously the staff report up through the executive. And so we really work to serve our members' interests and needs. And I think a lot of the developments that have occurred in the coalition have come in response to what the members want to see. So that is a primary focus. That's certainly my primary focus as our member services director, and I'm constantly out in the field having conversations with energy committees, select boards, councils to receive feedback and present them with factual and transparent information.
Working off that, the members choose a representative, and then the representatives select a board. So that says to mean that not every community is represented on the board, which is how it was when it was originally set up, right?
That's true. Yeah, with the size, I mentioned 68 members, right? That would be large. So there are 20 board directors, which is still a fairly substantial board. And there are rules that govern the representation. So we have to ensure that there's county representation, that there's representation from small communities all the way up to our largest city, which is Nashua. So there's the wide breadth of folks that are representing different types of communities, but I think the board takes it very seriously that they're not just representing their own community interests, they're representing the collective interests of the organization.
So what is the day-to-day operations like for Community Power? When you get up and go to work in the morning, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, like I said, we have a pretty small staff team. We are growing that staff team, but we won't probably ever be larger than 10, 11 employees. So we work very cross-functionally as we have to. But for me, I mean, we are focused on answering questions of our membership. Like I said, showing up to meetings and presenting materials, managing our website, which we can talk about some of those improvements later, managing our other communication systems, managing our customer interactions. So when people go through the call center, we're working with that call center team to provide them with the information they need. And then if they want to talk to an employee, eventually that makes it to myself and we'll have, discussions there. So things like that. We also work closely with our different vendors. We have print vendors for mailers. We have a back-end retail data manager. That sounds more complicated than it is, but they're managing our customer CRMs. They're managing, like I said, the call center and those customer interaction components. And, I also get involved with discussions, and we can talk about this more maybe a bit later, but with our portfolio management team, who's actually doing the power purchasing activities, and interact with our regulatory and legislative folks, help deliver services that are developed through projects and programs. So that just gives you a flavor. And if you want more details, happy to get into details.
Well, let's dive into one specific area, and that is the power delivery. Mm-hmm. So when the city of Dover not just became a founding member, but actively included the community's portfolio in Community Power, the city council took a vote and said, yes, we want to participate. We want to have our default provider essentially become Community Power. And for those that know or maybe don't remember or didn't learn the first time because they're new to the community, there is an opt-out provision. It's not a opt-in. It is everyone's default provider went from Eversource to Community Power for supply, not for delivery. Eversource still does the delivery and the billing for that matter. You had the opportunity to make a couple choices, actually. Opt out, say, nope, I want to stay with Eversource. You had the opportunity to say, I want more green components to my energy. So there's the Granite Basic is the entry level, as it were. And then you can choose different levels of green, which would be, it's 33, 50, and 100?
Correct.
And then at the same time, if I remember correctly, and definitely I want the listener to know if I'm wrong, you're not locked in for life. So you see a rate change and you say, you know what, I'd rather go from 50% renewable back to the basic. It's an easy website swap out.
Yeah.
Same thing if you really want to go back to Eversource, you could do that as well.
That's right. Yeah. So that's one of the major benefits of Community Power is it gives customers more options than they've ever had before. And we try to make it really easy for them to change if they want to change, like you said, between product levels, or if they decide they'd rather go with another supplier. There isn't any resistance, exit fees, anything that occurs there. So there's 3 ways that customers can select options through us. And that is through a self-service portal for Dover. That would be communitypowernh.gov/community/Dover. You can also get in touch via email. You can email info@communitypowernh.gov. In addition, you can call the customer service line. That's 1-866-603-7697, which is power. So 1-866-603-POWER. You can speak to someone that way as well. And folks can also make adjustments if they do want another supplier by contacting their utility or by contacting another supplier directly. So there are a lot of ways that customers can make changes to the supply portion if they feel that is their best option.
And if I recall correctly, when I went from basic, I wanted one of the more green levels. So I went in and moved up, as it were. I think all I needed was my utility account number. Obviously you need to know how to search for and find the account. So it's just basic account information. It's not a name, rank, and serial number.
Yeah, it's basic account information, some personal identifying information like your name and an email and a phone number. But
it is name, rank, and serial number.
It is not serial number, but it is pretty simple to go through the self-service if you prefer that option.
And I think it's also important to note that regardless of who the supplier is, Eversource is still the delivery source in the Dover area and is doing the billing. So as I think through that, and if you don't know, that's totally fine, but how much is supply and how much is delivery on the bill?
Yeah, so historically, it's been more of a 50-50 split, but we have seen an uptick on the delivery side of people's bills in recent years. And now, it depends on what supply costs are at any given time, but it's moving closer to a 60-40 or maybe even a 65-35 in some cases on the delivery to supply.
So you've circled around it, and I have too. The supply side, the economics of it, it's beneficial to have more communities within the coalition because there's a larger pool to purchase for. But at the same time, you're still competing. You're in a competitive arena for the energy itself. How does that work, and how do you negotiate, or how does community power seek to purchase the best deal?
Yeah, so this is definitely one place that we're always thinking of how we can do better as an organization. About 75% of the cost that goes into the rates is on the energy side. So to the extent that that can be lowered in the future, we can provide more competitive rates. But what we do is we work with our risk management committee, who will authorize a certain amount of power to be purchased based off of the amount of demand, essentially, that we're forecasting for our customer base. And they'll go out through our portfolio manager at Ascend Analytics. They'll basically go out into the market and get offers. So if you think of a bidding practice that happens as a municipality, it's somewhat similar. They'll get different offers for different amounts of the power that we need. And we might buy it all at once for 6 months. There might be a strategy where you buy, 60%, you might buy 70% and float a certain percentage in sort of what we call the real-time market or real-time prices. So there's different ways at different times that the organization approaches this. And we are actively working with our RMC to further dial in the strategy and say, hey, how can we do better on behalf of our customers? So that's always an area that there can be improvements made.
Do you have a sense for how much penetration you have in a community? In other words, in Dover, let's say there's 11,000 properties. There's more, but I'm just using a number.
Sure.
Do you have a sense for, is it 90% community power, 10% Eversource and others? Because there are other third-party suppliers. Is it 50-50? Is it 80-20?
Yeah, so our typical percentage rate has fallen around about 65% in most communities. Dover's not all that different. It's around, I think, 60% at present. But I will note that there has been a lot of apartment turnover that occurs in Dover and, new constructions and things like that. So we have this process because it should work that when a customer moves in, the default provider is community power. They sign up community power as their provider. That's not how it works because of some data issues with our utility Eversource. So we go through a process of refresh enrollments. So similar to a launch, periodically there are mailed notices. Yeah, gives people 30 days to make a decision, and then they get enrolled. So there is an upcoming refresh in Dover, and I know this has been brought to the attention of the city council that would potentially pick up some new customers within Dover Community Power, which is good for existing customers because it reduces individual customer costs. And like you said, the more that are involved, the better the purchasing power. And so that could increase that participation rate. But it depends on the uptake. It depends on customer choice ultimately.
Is there a difference between a residential customer and a commercial customer, or is it just a customer?
Well, there is in terms of the rates that are being charged now through the coalition. In the early days, there was a flat rate that was the same for whether you're a small commercial, residential customer. That has been adjusted as the board recognized that while we were tracking costs over time as an organization, that there were actually different costs associated with serving different customer classes. And therefore, the board made a decision to move to what we call cost of service rates. So we're not talking about a huge gap here, but there might be half a cent difference, for example, between what a residential customer and a small commercial customer are charged through community power.
So with all of that background, I don't think we're bearing the lead to say that it's been announced that your rates as of February 1st will be 14 cents per kilowatt hour, and that is higher than the Eversource rate.
Correct.
I got to think that is both an impact of the supply, the bidding process, et cetera, the penetration. As you said, the more involved, the more you can spread those costs when you're looking at the purchase. What else is going into that factor?
Yeah, so happy to talk through this. As you mentioned, there is definitely a gap this time around. Historically, there were significant savings. Savings peaked for Dover customers about 1.7 million. They have been, clawed back some from that point as there has been a rate disadvantage at times. But what is going into that differential? Well, the utilities have significantly changed the way that they purchase power since community power became a thing within New Hampshire and since the first programs were launched. Historically, they would buy all the power in a fixed contract with known costs for a 6-month block. Now, through an order at the Public Utilities Commission, there's a different approach where only for the small customers, 50% of the costs are fixed in a contract with a provider, and the other 50% is floated in the real-time market. This can be a good thing for customers because it could lead to a lower rate that's avoiding risk premiums, but it's basically shifting the risk of whatever's happening in the real-time market onto the customer base. And so rates are being set without costs being known, which is going to require reconciliations one way or another in future periods. And that's what's making it a little bit challenging for other suppliers within the marketplace because we want accurate price signals for customers, and we have some concerns over that piece. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing that there's a low Eversource rate right now. I think one of the values of community power is we are driving rate competition, and that's been clear.
So community power is taking a more methodical and usage-based approach versus a speculative approach. And in some ways, it sounds like the alternative is that speculative approach of saying, you know what, this is what we're going to buy at. And if it's more, oh well. But if it's less, great for us. We'll save money at Eversource, not the community.
Well, right. I mean, we are building into the rates all of our known costs and are fixing a fairly large percent of the portfolio. So we have known costs for our customer base. And we're very transparent about what goes into those costs. And one component of that we can talk about is the community reserve adder. So about 2 cents of the rate, it's a little more than 2 cents, is going to community joint reserves. And you might say, what the heck are those? Well, as an organization that's working on behalf of the cities and towns that we serve, we need to build in healthy financial reserves, which are owned by the communities or controlled by the communities, but they give us the cash flow and the balance to be able to get more competitive deals in the future. We can cut out middle parties and be more of a direct market participant in the future. We can, get good credit ratings and help develop local assets that could mix into our portfolio and lead to more competitive rates in the future. I mean, it's like any organization, you need, money in the bank to be able to increase your competition going forward. And that is the biggest reason for the reserves now. The board made a very cognizant decision that it wanted to kind of fast track some of the growth towards reserve targets in the current period to offer rate relief and more competition in a more near-term horizon than maybe a more prolonged approach, which would lead to a slightly lower rate now, but would sort of prolong the ability to be as competitive as we can be as an organization, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're taking the long game.
Yeah.
You're saying that there might be some short-term bumps, but the long-term value outweighs any inconvenience of the short-term bump. So I get a sort of sidebar question, and I think it's a PUC thing as opposed to a CPCNH thing, but why do we only set rates 6 months at a time? Why not lock in for 3 years? Why not say, you know what, we're gonna be 14 cents a kilowatt hour, higher than Eversource, but that's the kilowatt hour for the next 18 months, 12 months, what have you. Is there a reason we have to do the 6 month periods?
No, as an organization, we could get away from the 6 month periods. I think early on and through the present day, the reason it's been done in the 6 month increments is to offer customers, we talked about price signals, but it's more of a direct, in the moment, I guess, comparison of energy costs. But now that we've seen this shift to what we call proxy rate setting, I think the board and the risk management committee and the staff are thinking about, well, it's not the apples to apples that we thought it was going to be. So potentially there is an opportunity to move away from the 6 months as an organization and say, you know what, we're going to get you a fixed price for a year and a half, or use it 2 years, or whatever that length of time might be. So there's nothing saying that that couldn't be an option in the future. It's just not the direction we've gone in so far.
I appreciate you coming down, walking us through the rate changes, walking us through the portfolio and how it is developed, and recapping the history of community power. Is there anything the listeners should know that we haven't covered yet?
Well, I think the listeners should know that, there are some other values to what we're trying to accomplish here. And one of those is protecting consumer interests at the PUC, pushing for market innovation with our legislature, and to the extent that we can collectively activate our 68 members, there is some influence there to push for some positive change that we hope leads to greater customer value in the medium and the long term. So, we'll do our best to provide the pricing that we can provide that's hopefully good for customers in the near term, but there is a lot of long-term value that's going to come out of this. And one other example of that is some of our project development. We've worked with 11 of our member communities, including Dover, to construct the largest solar array in the state in Warner, New Hampshire. And Dover, as a municipal subscriber, is going to benefit from about 50% of the output of that project, which will lead to lower rates or an alternative funding stream for local projects for the municipality as a whole, which is going to in turn help the taxpayer base. So we're really excited about that project. I'm super glad that Dover's involved, but that's just really the tip of the iceberg of what we'll be able to do as an organization working with our communities. And we're very excited about a lot of other things we have in the works.
Great. Well, again, I appreciate you coming in and having a chat with us, and look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Dover has a wealth of history in its over 400 years of existence. Coming up, Mike Gillis is going to share some of that history with us.
This week in 1907, Dover was confronting the aftermath of one of the city's deadliest fires. On January 26, 1907, at the Chico Manufacturing Company's Mill No. 1, a devastating fire broke out that ultimately claimed 6 lives. The massive 5-story brick building was considered state-of-the-art and, quote, immune to fire, having recently passed inspections with flying colors. But on that fateful winter morning, disaster struck without warning. Around 6:30 in the morning on January 26th, a sprinkler had malfunctioned on the upper floor, prompting the supervisor to shut off the water so repairs could be made. Minutes later, workers spotted smoke billowing from a belt box. Sparks from the wet belts were igniting the extremely flammable cotton. Employees rushed to douse the flames, but were horrified to find the sprinklers useless without water pressure. The fire raced violently across the room, leaping from machine to machine. Confused workers flooded toward the exits. Thick smoke permeated the upper floors as the inferno consumed the carding room. The sprinkler system was overwhelmed by the intense heat, melting pipes and reducing water pressure further. By the time the main valve was reopened, it was too late. The ravenous blaze had taken hold. It burst into the engine room and charged up the belt boxes, rupturing sprinklers in its path. Realizing the futility of the sprinklers, the crew reluctantly shut them down to conserve water for fire hoses. From there, the fight against the fire descended into chaos. Responders outside battled below freezing temperatures that froze hoses and pumps solid. Many fire trucks had to retreat to thaw out equipment. The chaos was amplified by droves of townspeople and out-of-town spectators who flocked downtown to view the spectacle. Broken fire lines cut by the wagon wheels of sightseers further hampered progress. All available police were called upon to restrain the crowds amassing outside the police station. Inside the mill, firefighters fought through smoke so thick it drove them from their posts. The flames never fully engulfed the mill, but left smoldering embers buried deep in the wreckage. For 2 days and nights, crews worked tirelessly against the inferno that refused to die. Eventually, the upper 2 floors collapsed. Crews were forced to withdraw as floors buckled under the immense weight of ice. Miraculously, the sturdy brick walls withstood the fire. When the smoke finally cleared, the tremendous toll of the disaster became evident. While most workers had escaped early on, several went back inside, never to return. In total, 6 lives were lost, and the once splendid mill was reduced to ruins at a loss of $1 million. The story sent shockwaves through the community that relied on the mill. But with resilient New England spirit, the company swiftly rebuilt and was running again by October 1908. Strict improvements were enacted so no fire could ever again exact such tragedy.
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the city of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.